to say that today's hearing and its works will result in a stenographic report and the broadcast on the TV web of the Chamber of Deputies, and remote participation is allowed according to the rules established by our in-house regulation. The agenda within our investigations on the part of Italy and concerning the international community for the promotion and protection of human rights and against discrimination, we shall hear the representatives of B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories. On behalf of the members of the committee, I'd like to salute and thank for her availability to take part in our work through a video conferencing device, Ms. Sarit Micheli. I'd like to recall that B'Tselem, founded in 1989, is an independent organization which is non-partisan, which fights to guarantee to all people, both Palestinians and Jews who live in Israel, in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, human rights, freedom, and equality. This on the basis of a vision of the central role of the human person. The Hebrew term B'Tselem makes reference to the Genesis, in which is recalled that God created humanity in his image. The organization is particularly committed in collecting documents and witness statements on the violations of human rights committed by Israel in the Palestinian occupied territories, and received for its activities several awards and recognition, widespread recognition. I myself was able to see it in the field during my visit in Hebron, which took place in 2022, which occurred with the activists of Breaking the Silence. On the 18th of September last, the General Assembly of the United Nations approved with 124 votes in favor, 14 against, and 43 abstentions, a resolution on the legal consequences coming from the policies and practices of Israel in the Palestinian occupied territories. In the resolution, the General Assembly calls on Israel, first of all, to stop without further ado to its illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territories. More in detail, it calls Israeli authorities to comply with the international law, to withdraw its military forces, to immediately cease new settlements, activities, to evacuate all settlers from occupied territories, to take down the wall which was built within the occupied West Bank. Furthermore, the resolution asks Israel to allow all displaced Palestinians during the occupation to go back to their place of origin and to repair the damage caused by its occupation. In the debate that took place the next day on the 19th of September at the Security Council of the UN, the Special Coordinator for the United Nations for the Peace Process in Middle East, Ton Wennesland, highlighted the constant increase of illegal activities in terms of settlement in violation of Resolution 2334 of 2016, adopted by the Security Council, which invites Israel to immediately and fully put a stop to all these settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, and to fully comply with its legal obligations in this respect. The European Union, on its part, has always condemned the violence against Palestinians on the part of extremist and radical settlers in the occupied West Bank, which has reached unprecedented levels after the terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel on the 7th of October 2023. In this context, the Council of the European Union adopted, and lastly on the 15th of July, sanctions concerning a number of actors physical and bodies, responsible of serious and systematic abuse of human rights against Palestinians in the West Bank, abuses of the right of each individual to enjoy the highest possible level of physical and mental integrity, ownership, the right to ownership, the right to private and family life, the right to freedom and creed, and the right to education. Amongst the others, Lechava was sanctioned, a group of radical right which actually fights for Jewish supremacy, and Hilltop Youth, a youth group which is known for its violent actions against people and Palestinian villages in the West Bank. Given these context issues, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Sarit Mikaeli for her contribution, please.
Thank you very much. I appreciate immensely the opportunity to speak to you and to discuss issues that are affecting all human beings living in our region, and specifically what has been ongoing since last year. I think maybe we can start, first of all, with an acknowledgement that this past year has had simply a devastating impact on all people living here. It's been absolutely terrible and very hard to endure for everyone, but I think absolutely important also to accept that the situation and the suffering of the people of Gaza is simply impossible to continue to ignore, to continue to brush over, and to continue to normalize. And I think the first thing I'd like to start with is repeat again our call that was made together with other human rights organizations that are part of Israel's civil society for a ceasefire and a hostage deal. A ceasefire and a hostage deal are the only ways to guarantee a change in trajectory in our region towards de-escalation, towards returning the hostages who have been, the 101 Israeli hostages who are suffering unbearable torture as well, to deal with all of the developments that have harmed human rights so much. This is the bare minimum, and we have to rely on you, on members of the international community, in order to do this. I think this past year, if we will be commemorating the 376th day since Hamas's attack against Israeli civilians in the south of Israel and the beginning of this horror. This was an atrocity, a war crime. It was condemned severely by ourselves and by members of Israel's civil society as a whole. And painfully, we suffered greatly. We suffered great loss also in our small community of human rights organizations due to people being killed, people being taken hostage, and people losing vast numbers of their relatives and loved ones. It was a massive trauma to all Israelis. And sadly and unfortunately and shockingly, our government has since, for the past year, been cynically manipulating this terrible trauma in order to pursue its ideological agenda that is not providing Israelis like myself and my friends and colleagues and also anyone around me with any sort of safety or security. On the contrary, I feel much less safe than I felt a year ago, in spite of the fact that Israel has been engaged in a war on 3 fronts at least. I think to understand what Israel has been doing, we have to accept that the overarching goal of the Israeli regime is essentially imposing this guiding logic of Jewish supremacy over the entire territory under Israel's control. This has been enshrined as a constitutional principle 6 years ago in Israel, the principle of Jewish supremacy, and the current government's guidelines also state that the Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all parts of the land of Israel. And this essential analysis that B'Tselem has of the reality throughout our region, a reality of apartheid, guides our understanding of the criminal Hamas-led attack on October 7th, and also Israel's response to it. And the response that Israel has been engaged in over the past year is essentially a war against the entire Palestinian people, and a war that has been that has involved committing war crimes almost daily. In Gaza, this has taken the form of expulsion, starvation, killing, and the destruction of property at an unprecedented scale. This is far more than revenge, although it is also a war of revenge. But what Israel is doing is utilizing this opportunity to promote its ideological agenda, making Gaza uninhabitable. And we are hearing calls from elements of the Israeli right that are well represented in our government to resettle Gaza. This is something that should not be shrugged aside or ignored. In this context, I'd like to mention the call by B'Tselem, together with several other Israeli human rights organizations, regarding the real risk that we are sensing, the real concern that Israel has been quietly implementing for the past 2 weeks, the so-called general's plan that involves basically starving the population of northern Gaza in order to forcibly transfer all of the population that has remained in that area out of the area. This is through tightening the already existing siege, through not allowing any sort of food or fuel in, and through constantly barraging the area. This is a massive concern because it is absolutely clear, and according to the UN, also has been revealed that for about 2 weeks, virtually no food has reached northern Gaza. There are a few 100,000 people there who are essentially starving. And this is a great concern, and we are highlighting it not just because it's an immoral, shockingly immoral and illegal plan. It's also the utter responsibility of the international community to prevent this. And what we are seeing now internationally is a sort of wait-and-see approach, whereby it seems that the international community is waiting, is issuing condemnations. We saw some action now by the US administration, but we need much more in order to guarantee that this isn't going to lead to Israel basically establishing facts on the ground that will remove all of the population, the civilian population of North Gaza. And if this indeed happens, we are crystal clear that the international community will be complicit in this, in the crime of forcible transfer and in the crime of starvation. So this is an important warning, and in order to avert this catastrophe, we need action, not just words. I'd like to address also briefly the situation in the West Bank, because it's also an essential part of the picture. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the Israeli government is also exploiting the circumstances in our society to create irreversible changes. Since October, Israeli forces have killed more than 650 Palestinians there, including at least 140 minors. Israeli settlers are attacking Palestinians and carrying out pogroms in broad daylight with the support from the government. Settlers have so far managed to drive out 19 Palestinian herding communities from their home through this use of intense violence and threats. In this context, I would like to mention a recent statement that Italy has been part of, a statement issued by the European Union and member states and like-minded countries about the current olive harvest. The olive harvest in Palestine started yesterday, officially, and one of the greatest fears we have, and this fear is not hypothetical, it's being implemented, it's being revealed on a daily basis, that settlers together with the army will manage to totally derail this olive harvest season through attacking Palestinian olive harvesters, through removing them from their land, through stealing the crops, and through organizing together with the Israeli authorities to not allow Palestinian harvesters to get either in the vicinity, the broad vicinity of settlements, or to cross the separation barrier in order to reach their olive groves that Israel has locked them away from. And we are already, as I said, seeing daily incidents on the ground that raise a massive risk. The European Union member states, including Italy, signed a very encouraging statement in terms of how it analyzes the issue, the problem. It was very clear, it was unequivocally condemning of this violence. But where we would say this does not go far enough is in action. We think that currently there is no ability for statements. Statements will not change the conduct of the Israeli government. The government is dominated by the far-right settler lobby. It's become absolutely crystal clear that both the army and the police are not going to protect Palestinians, certainly not during this olive harvest, without intense international pressure. And this must take form not just of statements, but also of consequences. Israeli policymakers have to understand that there would be consequences to disrupting the olive harvest that provides such an important annual income for Palestinian society as a whole. And I think there are many additional things to talk about. One of the real risks or the causes for intense concern is what we refer to as the Gazification of the West Bank, the adoption by the Israeli army of tactics and weapons that have only been used in Gaza up to the recent period, like aerial bombardments, like firing at people from drones, killing Palestinian, primarily militants, but in many cases also civilians, using these weapons, and also the tactic of completely destroying the infrastructure in places like the Jenin and the Tulkarem refugee camps, leading to massive numbers of Palestinians that are forced out of their homes. I would conclude with discussing the war on Palestinians, that it is also happening inside prisons. B'Tselem recently issued a report that was based on the testimonies of Palestinian prisoners from throughout the region. So Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and also from inside Israel itself. And it reveals shocking conditions in the Israeli prison system, in how it treats Palestinians, to the extent that we decided to declare that Israel has turned its prison system vis-a-vis Palestinians to a network of torture camps. Palestinians are facing torture and abuse throughout the system. And these are not only Palestinians who Israel suspects of being involved in the atrocities of October 7th. This is across the board, all Palestinians. Israel arrested thousands of Palestinians in the past year. Most of them did not actually have a trial. And the conditions of their incarceration and the way they are treated really, again, raises the need, the necessity for international action to end this. And I think overall, it's crucial that we understand that the international community has failed in its duty to protect Palestinians, to protect civilians. This is a failure that Palestinians and Israelis are paying the price for on a daily basis. And we really need to see this change. I want to thank you again, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you have.
Sì, grazie. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Michaeli, for the overall picture you have drawn. It is a very, very worrying picture. We are following, of course, the whole issue and have done so for years, but listening to your words, words coming from somebody is living these events firsthand is something completely different. I'd like to ask my colleagues whether somebody would like to take the floor to maybe ask for further clarifications that you have raised, because you have raised many issues: the ceasefire, the release of hostages, the basis on which to maybe cooperate or build some sort of pathway forward, and unfortunately we have not reached this point yet. You told us that there is a manipulation of war on the part of the right-wing government in Israel to impose a political agenda. There is the general plan of having the North Gaza population starve and impose displacement with the use of starvation. And there is a wait-and-see policy from the international community, which is not bearable. These are irreversible changes that the government is undertaking both in Gaza and in the West Bank, you said. And what you told us about the olive harvest is in line with this aim. Not allow Palestinians to collect and to harvest olives means to stop them from collecting the income that may allow them to live with dignity. And then you said that the EU member states and Italy, that we are not doing as much as we could because we have to move from condemnation, circumstantial statements to do more. I don't know whether somebody would like to maybe ask a question. My colleague, Stefania Scariche, who is also coordinator for the intergroup for the peace between Israel and Palestine that we belong to, many of us, which would like to ask the first question, please. First of all, I'd like to thank Chair Boldrini for this important hearing. I'd like to thank all the colleagues here. You truly painted a very clear and horrible picture. I'd like to ask you something about the recognition of the state of Palestine after 300 resolutions of the UN in which were never complied with on the part of Israel, and where there is an ongoing violation of international law. I'd like to know what your perspective is concerning the importance of recognizing the Palestinian state and also, therefore, a recognition of borders. And I'd like to know what you think about the immediate interruption, be it economic or trade, with the government of Mr. Netanyahu. Thank you. Thank you. Honorable Ascari. Let me just collect a few questions, and then Dr. Michaeli, maybe you can answer all these questions. Arturo Scotto, please. Thank you, Chair Boldrini. Thank you for having organized this important exchange of ideas. I have two quick and simple questions. The first has to do with an issue that we have clearly the consequences of acknowledged. I was there, and the Chair Boldrini was there too. We were in Rafah a few months ago in March of 2024. And what emerged from this trip and what actually happened was as follows. We witnessed humanitarian breaks, pauses, to promote a mass vaccination campaign in Gaza concerning the very real risk of combating very serious pathologies such as polio. Médecins Sans Frontières launched an alarm which was confirmed by journals such as The Lancet, which proves that the death toll is much higher than expected. Cholera was also feared. I'd like to ask you, do you have any information of even more serious problems health-wise, and if there's some sort of dialogue ongoing which can prevent further contagion? The second, since B'Tselem is the largest Israel non-governmental organization, and since it has always been an objective think tank which tests out the violation of human rights and verifies that these are happening, what kind of perception do you have after a year from the beginning of the war, after the huge tragedy of the 7th of October, after the death toll of 42,000 people in Gaza, and within the picture you have been painting, characterized by the fact that war fronts are becoming more and more. So what is your opinion concerning a possible shift in the Israeli public opinion? I'd like to know whether the mobilization processes against the Netanyahu government are getting anywhere. In addition, of course, to the fact that these demonstrations show that no negotiation to free hostages is taking place. And in addition to the fact that the government is breaching international law, so apart from everything else, is there some room for maneuver? Thank you. Dario Carotenuto, please. I'd like to thank all our colleagues here and the Chair Boldrini for having organized this very important and significant event. I'd like to thank B'Tselem for your courage, because I believe you need a good amount of courage to deal with these topics as you do. However, I ask myself, and I'd like to ask you, how can we explain, faced with a worldwide public opinion, at least those who do not belong in political circles, say, since there is wide public opinion in favor of Palestinians, the question is, how can you explain the absence or the lack of knowledge of a strong mobilization that this scenario should entail? Not so much within Israel, maybe, but on the part of the friends of Israel. In Parliament here, yesterday, we could ask questions Premier Meloni, what about these issues? And she was concerned, she said, about the possible isolation of Israel from an international perspective. And this is a concern that we share, I have to tell you the truth. But we are also concerned about the reason why Israel is becoming and is willing to become so isolated. We have no perception of a public opinion which openly stands against this government. because there is an indictment of genocide which should cause for concern in the Israeli community and Israeli public opinion in Israel as well. And I believe that there are also arrest warrants against Mr. Netanyahu, Mr. Gallant, on the part of the International Criminal Court, which should focus the attention of public opinion on a truly horrible situation, to say the least. Let us now give the floor to Dr. Michaeli so that she can answer the first few questions, and then let's see if others will be asked. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll try and answer all of these questions in order, but if I somehow miss things, please feel free to raise it with me. I'll start with the issue of recognition. So B'Tselem does not take a specific position on any sort of final status outcome of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, aside from our clear demand that this status respects human rights, the human rights of all human beings living within our region between, the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. And this means that all human beings, be they Palestinians or Israeli Jews, have to have all of their rights respected, the right to life, the right to freedom, to safety, to property, to pursuing their futures, and no solution can involve any sort of supremacy and any sort of violence. This is our only concern. We view the current reality, which is a one-state reality in our region, as an apartheid reality, a reality through which myself as an Israeli Jew, I enjoy privileges, I enjoy the most, the highest status in terms of all of my access to rights, more privileged than any other Palestinian living in the area, be they an Israeli citizen who is a Palestinian, or a person living in the West Bank or East Jerusalem or in Gaza. And certainly anyone from the Palestinian diaspora. And this is the reality that we wish to end. We don't take a position on how many, essentially how many states need to exist after. But this has to end now. And another crucial demand is that an end to dominance, to supremacy, and future of rights for all shouldn't be predicated on any sort of political or diplomatic process. Those should be a very basic demands that are made right now, regardless of any sort of political development. So that's, I hope, a bit more of an explanation on B'Tselem's position on this issue. Secondly, another question dealt with the consequences for Israeli policymakers of their crimes, essentially. And it was also addressed in a question about the International Criminal Court. So I think B'Tselem has been very clear, again, saying that we think that it is an essential component of any sort of future that involves protecting rights, that consequences and accountability have to be part of it. At the moment, Israeli policymakers are not held accountable for most of what they inflict, most of the crimes that they inflict upon Palestinians. The request by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for arrest warrants was one of the first times that this has actually, the situation that what Israel has been doing to Palestinians, committing crimes of starvation in the Gaza Strip and many other war crimes that B'Tselem has addressed, has looked at, has analyzed. That's the first time it has actually led to any individual consequences. This is a very important opportunity for the international community to clarify that this ICC process is a valid process, it's a legitimate process. Similarly, the process in the ICJ, all of the different lawsuits are, against the Israeli government are legitimate lawsuits. The ICJ has to be allowed to reach conclusions, and the international community has to be clear that they need to be implemented. We also, I think it's it's even maybe unnecessary to say that the advisory opinion by the ICJ has to be implemented, and that maybe, I mean, it's possible that we have, with this advisory opinion, gone forward at least one further step towards a situation where the international community, primarily, I would in this context mention the European Union and the United States, can stop utilizing the excuse that the legal situation is not clarified enough on what is going on the ground. I mean, I think that we've already seen some unwelcome statements from these two directions, but ultimately this has to be where the international community begins to implement. And I want to now address the issue of the health system in Gaza. So I should clarify that we are finding it extremely difficult to have our own reporting on these issues from Gaza. So we rely on the international humanitarian sector that is doing incredibly hard work in these absolutely dangerous and shocking conditions. And the main thing we've heard following the successful campaign for polio vaccinations is that the risk now is to the almost 90% of the population of Gaza who have been made, who have been displaced, who many of whom are living in IDP camps with virtually no access to the relevant and necessary services. We are now still in autumn, the weather is still good, but rain could start falling any moment now. And the real risk in terms of the sanitation, in terms of the health of these people who are enduring untold suffering in IDP camps is going to deteriorate drastically if nothing is done immediately to pursue a serious ceasefire and a cessation of hostilities that would enable them to return to their homes. Their homes are also in shocking disrepair and devastated, but at least not be on the coastal, on basically the coast in El Mouassi, completely completely exposed to all of the elements and to rain and storms in the next few months without a functioning healthcare system. In terms of the question about public opinion in Israel, so I can address it as an Israeli, a very concerned Israeli. I'm also active in the struggle to demand a hostage deal from our government. Tell aren't experts on this, but all I can say is that many hundreds of thousands of Israelis protested the government's shocking lack of willingness to engage in any sort of meaningful steps towards a hostage deal. That happened after we got the news that 6 of the hostages were actually executed by Hamas, who could have been rescued, whose lives could have been saved a few months ago if Israel and if the Israeli government would have pursued a hostage deal. So there are very large numbers of Israelis, and according to public opinion research, the majority of the Israeli public supports a ceasefire. However, unfortunately, that's not to say, or I should clarify, support a hostage swap that is predicated on a ceasefire. Right? I should be very clear on this. But that doesn't mean that the Israeli government is actually going to listen to the public on this issue. It's become clear, and I think both serious journalists and also people from within the Israeli establishment have reached the conclusion that many of us Israelis, like myself, have reached months ago, which is that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not interested in pursuing a ceasefire. He wants to perpetuate this war indefinitely. And for as long as he is able to do this, he will do it. He has an unholy alliance with the far-right, proto-fascist elements in his government that wish to resettle the Gaza Strip. We hear it again and again, and I advise people to pay attention and listen to these people who may have been fringe elements in a few years ago, but now are central policymakers in the Israeli government. They want to resettle Gaza. They view the horrors, the terrible, horrific nightmare that we have all been living through for the past year as a period of miracles, as a miraculous time for their redemption. And we really need to be paying attention. And this means that the government, a coalition that is strong, that is going to survive for at least 2 years, unless something very surprising happens, will continue this war and will not reach a hostage deal before the remaining hostages die in Gaza or just simply get lost and are never recovered and brought back home. So I think this is the really terrible truth about what it means to live in Israel these days. Instead of moving towards a ceasefire and hostage deal that would return these Israelis, save countless Israeli lives, Lebanese lives, and Gazan lives and Palestinian lives, Israel is moving in the other direction and in the direction of belligerence. And we now have a war on at least 2 fronts, and sadly, the great fear is that this is going to expand to a regional situation. Finally, the question about the ability of Israel, even though public opinion is supportive of an end to this terrible conflict, terrible war of Israel against Gaza and the broader Palestinian people. Unfortunately, the public opinion in the world is not reflected in the will of governments and in what governments are doing. Governments, and this is a question that I try to answer as well in my work, and I raise it again and again with policymakers. The fact that governments are not willing to set red lines and adhere to them when it comes to the conduct of Israel for this past year, the fact that we are still in, I'd like to remind everyone that a year and 9-10 months ago, we were promised that this war will end by the end of the year or possibly by January. We're still in the war, and the Israeli army is going in and out of areas in Gaza that it's already claimed to have liberated, right, to have freed, quote unquote, of Hamas. And this is simply going to continue with a terrible toll being paid by countless human beings in Gaza whose suffering is simply impossible to convey for as long as the international community is not steadfast and takes action in order to clarify to Israeli policymakers that this simply cannot continue. So I'd like to thank you again. I appreciate this opportunity extremely, and to convey also our thanks at B'Tselem for you paying attention to our messages.
Sì, dottoressa Michaeli, grazie.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Michele. I myself have a few questions, and I'm not sure if anyone else would like to ask questions. So based on what you say, either the international community will do something, will exert pressure on the government, or Netanyahu will keep on going because from the inside, I mean from within, there will be no possibility to stop him. It's as if the Israeli community or society doesn't have the antibodies, enough antibodies to get rid of this extreme right government which wants to expand its control. And so we need an external pressure. So my question is, what type of concrete action should be done to stop this permanent war, which is pursued because of Prime Minister's self-interest, because this means that he will hold on to power. So what specific action could stop Netanyahu from the external environment? The global opinion stands with the Palestinians. If you see the streets, people are taking to the streets around the globe. In Italy, there have been 2 recent rallies, and then there's going to be another one on October 26th. Many of us have taken part in these rallies, in these protests. So, in other words, the international community is made of citizens, men, women, but also of governments. And governments are those which are not doing anything. So B'Tselem, Breaking the Silence, all of these organizations, Israeli NGOs operating for peace, we're all standing by you. But based on what you say, governments from around the world should do something that have not done as yet. So what would you advise them to do to stop this horrible war, which seems to be endless?
I have to say that I agree with your analysis. I think one of the weaknesses of the Israeli opposition, and this I have to also clarify, I'm saying as an Israeli citizen, not as a representative of B'Tselem. This is my personal analysis. B'Tselem just simply doesn't take a position on these issues. The weakness of the Israeli opposition is that in spite of the fact that most of it, the vast majority, I would say also a clear majority of Israelis, when public opinion is surveyed, want to release the hostages, understand that in order to do that, you have to have a ceasefire. Many people, I think, are already willing to admit that the current war aims that have been presented to Israelis are simply not true. They're contradictory, they're not obtainable, they're only leading to more and more excuses for additional military action, in which also Israeli soldiers are killed. Public opinion is very sensitive to this, but still the majority of Israelis are willing also to participate in this. The Israelis are very angry about the fact that, for example, during this time where vast numbers of Israelis have been serving long periods of service as in combat in Gaza and now in Lebanon, have been called for service. The government is now planning a law or legislative process that will prevent the state from forcing the ultra-Orthodox community to become to be recruited into the army. So there is a lot of public anger about these things, but this public anger isn't translated into any sort of meaningful action to reject the actual war. This is the situation we have. I think we have to acknowledge it. This is the reality. And therefore, I think international action, as you said, is essential, because this isn't simply an internal Israeli issue. It's an international issue. It has bearings on the security of the entire region. And in terms of what we have already called for, we say that the international community should utilize all the tools at its disposal. And this includes criminal, diplomatic, and economic tools in order to clarify to Israeli policymakers that they have to, that there is this resistance internationally against what they are perpetrating. Countries like Italy that have a close relationship now with the Israeli regime also have a responsibility to do this, because friends of Israel are even more duty bound, and I would also say have a moral duty to stop Israel from continuing down this path.
Bene, allora grazie.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for this presentation. Thank you for being here with us, and we hope to hear from you soon and to have other opportunities in having an update of the current situation, because this is not only in the interest of the region, but also in the interest of European leaders, because this has a knock-on effect throughout Europe. Thank you so much, and I wish you fruitful work. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.